So it's October 7th, 2024 here in Boise, Idaho. And a lot of you might know that I have a special connection to Israel. My wife is Israeli. I spent some time in Israel. My kids were born there. And so I wanted to publish a video on some of my thoughts over this past year. It's not related to Israel or not related to real estate at all. And I have some notes here. It's not going to be edited or well produced. I just wanted to kind of open up and give you a couple thoughts of what I've seen over the past year since these horrible atrocities occurred over in Israel 1 year ago, October 7th, 2023. Now, time has a way of making our memories fade. And, even I can kind of get caught up in the grind and really forget what actually happened 1 year ago. So 1 year ago, October 7th, 2023, 3,000 Hamas fighters broke through the barrier, came into Israel from Gaza, and murdered, raped, and mutilated over 1,200 Israelis. Now, some of the bodies were so dismembered that it took several months to actually identify these bodies, these victims. And the rapes and the things that they did to these women and children are so horrible that I can't even describe them for you here. It's too graphic. Some of the bodies they brought back to Gaza to crowds of thousands in Gaza City who were cheering when they saw the mutilated bodies. I don't know how innocent you can be if you can be cheering when you see a body of a person who was just killed and is seriously mutilated. But what people forget is that in addition to the Hamas fighters, there also were civilians that came in several waves throughout the day. A total of about 3,000 Gazan civilians as well, who also participated in the rapes and in the murders and the pillaging, stealing. So in total, about 6,000 Gazans came across the border and took part in the atrocities 1 year ago. Parents were murdered in front of their children. Where they were kidnapped, and the people of Gaza, Hamas, and even the civilians there, took women, babies, elderly, and then brought them into underground tunnels. There's still 101 people who were kidnapped that are still there. 101 of them. 36 of those are confirmed to be dead. So there's the Israelis estimate that there's about 65 who are still alive today, a year later, probably living in underground tunnels in Gaza under horrible situations. This was the largest attack on Jews since the Holocaust. I'm sure you've heard that in the news. But just to give you an idea of how massive this event was for Israel, let me share a couple of other significant events in Jewish life. So in the early 1900s, there were a series of attacks against Jews, anti-Semitic attacks that we call pogroms. And these really are what led to the establishment, the founding of the State of Israel in 1948. 1905, for example, in Russia, big pogrom, 300 Jews were killed. Then another serious pogrom happened later that year where 120 were killed. So about 500 Russian Jews were killed in the course of about a year in 1905. So that's 500 in 1 year. Obviously, the attack on October 7th eclipses those numbers. The first Intifada, so that's the first Palestinian uprising, which ran from 1987 to 1993. During those 5 years, about 200 Israeli civilians were killed. The second Intifada, which I lived through from 2000 to 2005, 775 Israeli civilians were killed and an additional 300 Israeli troops. So it's about 1,000 Israelis killed in a matter of about 4.5 years during the second Intifada. So obviously 1,200 in 1 day vastly overshadows anything that has happened in Jewish history since the Holocaust. It was just a massive event of unknown proportions up until that point a year ago. So what are the current stats? 1,200 Israelis killed last year on October 7th. 251 were kidnapped. 101 of them are still kidnapped, of which 36 are confirmed to be dead. So the Israelis estimate that about 65 are still alive. And 118 were returned a few months after they were kidnapped. So last November is when they started to have the negotiations, and about 118 were returned to Israel in several waves. Since the start of the ground operation a year ago, 347 soldiers were killed. And on October 7th last year, 728 soldiers were killed in one day. So about 1,000 soldiers, including those killed on October 7th last year, have fallen in this past year. Now get this. How many rockets have been fired at Israel? 26,000 rockets over the past year. Okay, 26,000 rockets since the start of the war last year. 13,000 of them have come from Gaza, 13,200. 12,000 of them from Lebanon, so that's Hezbollah. 60 of them from Syria, 180 from Yemen, 400 from Iran, and some from Iraq as well, but I couldn't get the numbers for that. So you have rockets from 5 other countries, in addition to Gaza: Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, Iraq, and Iran. So obviously, this has been a horrible situation in Israel over the past year. During the Holocaust, the Nazis tried to hide their actions. Hamas filmed their actions, and they exposed everything they did to the known world, and they posted them online. So today really marks a somber day for the country of Israel. And so I wanted to, in this video, I wanted to just make 2 points, kind of 2 reflective points over the past year. Now, over the past year, I've watched hundreds, probably thousands actually, of hours of news, footage, interviews, everything related to the situation in Israel, because it's been so close to me and my family. And I've noticed that it's very popular to see people say, yes, October 7th was bad, but look at what Israel has done since then. Look at the devastation that has been done in Gaza. And so they very quickly move from Israel being the victim to being the aggressor. And if you do that enough times, and you do that in a subtle way enough times, eventually you kind of forget that Israel was even the victim. And they're portrayed as the aggressor. And this is simply a reflection of my first point, which is we live in a twisted society that calls evil good and good evil. I mean, we really do. Our society calls evil good and good evil. I mean, it's amazing. Who's to blame for all of the destruction in Gaza? Is it Israel or Hamas? Imagine if you were flying over Dresden or over some of these other cities in Germany or other parts of Europe during World War II, and you were to see all of the destroyed homes and the devastation there. Who would you blame for that? Would you say, man, look at these allies. They are so horrible. Look at how they have brought destruction across Europe. Or would you say, this is the fault of the Nazis. If there were no Nazis, there would be no death and no destruction in Europe. Why is it that it's so easy for us to see that with regard to World War II? Clearly, the Nazis are to blame. And yet, when it comes to Israel and Gaza, Israel's the aggressor. Israel's the one at fault. Israel's the one who has brought all of this about. Israel didn't ask for this war. I mean, you see people in the news say, why is Israel bringing this war upon themselves? They're not going to be able to finish this war. Well, they forget that on October 6th of last year, there was no war. The war started when Hamas crossed the border and killed 1,200 Israelis and took 251 of them as hostages. So don't blame Israel. And shame on you if you do. Shame on you if you say that Israel has committed genocide in Gaza. Israel hasn't committed genocide in Gaza. Israel is trying to avoid killing civilians. Hamas is trying to kill civilians. They're the ones who killed the civilians on October 7th. Lebanon is the one who's launching rockets towards Tel Aviv, as is Yemen, as is Iraq, as is Iran, as is Syria. They are actually targeting civilians. And yet the society that we live in calls evil good and good evil. How many resolutions from the UN over the past year have been passed that explicitly says that Iran is committing genocide against, or let's not use the word genocide, that Iran or Hezbollah or Hamas is committing war crimes on the Israelis. They're the ones that actually are targeting civilians in the state of Israel. And yet you don't see that in the news. You don't see the UN condemning Iran. You don't see the UN condemning Lebanon. You don't see the UN calling on Lebanon to rein in their terrorists. You don't see the UN saying we need to put an embargo on Lebanon so that they don't get their weapons anymore. Again, the society that we live in calls evil good and good evil. And when you think about it, I mean, there is no with Gaza. Okay, you could say maybe there's some sort of a land dispute. There's no dispute when it relates to the north. There's no dispute as to where the border between Israel and Lebanon is. And yet the Hezbollah are launching tens of thousands of rockets into the country of Israel, and yet you don't see that highlighted in the news. Over the past year, we've seen a society that calls evil good, right? We've seen tens of thousands of students across the country that have been chanting Hamas slogans. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That's actually taken straight out of Hamas's charter. I read it, actually. There's two versions of it, one written in the 80s, one that was updated, I think, in 2000. And it says there is no such thing as a two-state solution. Right? Hamas does not believe in a two-state solution. They believe in a one-state solution. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free of Jews, of Israelis. There's only Palestinians that are going to live in Israel. And yet, does the media condemn that? No. They actually give them a platform to make those chants. And then, you'll see the media bring in politicians. They'll bring in Israeli politicians, and then they'll ask them questions like I said earlier. Why are you starting a war that you can't finish? Aren't you risking starting a regional war that's going to escalate and that's going to, cause further death and destruction? And yet they forget Israel didn't start this war. Who is it that started the war? It's Hamas. All of the blame falls on the shoulders of Hamas. And obviously the other parties involved, Iran and Hezbollah and the Houthis and all of the other proxies. Our society calls evil good and good evil, and I think we've seen that over the past year very clearly. Second point that I wanted to make is I think the only way forward is with a strong leader. Now, I know Bibi Netanyahu has been under a lot of pressure, both internally and externally, and he's had some criticisms, and I understand that. October 7th happened under his watch. And so people want explanations. Why was Israel left so unprepared? And why was it so shocking that this happened, right? They had no idea of what was brewing. And so they do want some accounting, and I understand that. But what I appreciate about Bibi is that he is a strong leader. You remember a couple months ago, the U.S., along with everybody else in the world, was saying to Israel, don't go into Rafah, into Rafiah, right? Don't go there. It's going to be a humanitarian disaster. There's going to be hundreds of thousands of civilian deaths. Do not go there. Remember, they famously asked Biden, what do you have to say to Israel who's thinking about going to Rafah? And he said, don't, right? Don't do it. Well, Bibi, I remember watching sort of his response in Israeli press, and he was like, look, I'm going to do what is best for the country of Israel, and I'm going to do it with or without the support of the world. We are here to support our own existence. We're not going to just succumb to the will of the politicians throughout the world. People need a strong leader, and I think the only way forward is with a strong leader. Now, I read Bibi Netanyahu's autobiography last year, a 700-page autobiography, and I felt like I got a little bit of a glimpse into kind of some of his principles and some of the things that he truly believes. And as I've observed him over the past year, I see that he really does not compromise on the non-negotiables. He's ready to compromise on things that he can give and take on, but the non-negotiables, he doesn't budge. It doesn't matter how much pressure there is. He says, no, I'm just not going to do that. And I appreciate that. You have other leaders that are on the left in Israel. They're like, just give them this and give them that. Let's get our hostages back, and then we'll pick up the pieces and we'll deal with it. Bibi says, no, we are, we are fighting for our very existence, and I'm not going to give in to the will of, the politicians around the world. I'm going to do what I think is right. And so I really do feel like the only way forward is through strong leadership. Now, does that mean that Bibi should be the leader forever moving forward? Is he, can we not criticize him? No, I'm not saying that. But what we do need is a strong leader. And unfortunately, we've seen weak leadership in our country here in the United States. Over the past 3 years, we've seen a total lack of strength and leadership here in the U.S. under the Biden administration. I totally agree with the Reagan principle of peace through strength, because people see weak leaders. They see that there's a power vacuum, and then they take advantage of that. And I mean, just look at the world. Just look at how things have developed since Trump left office. Let's not make that same mistake again. Election season is here. And honestly, who do you think is the stronger leader? Is it Trump or is it Harris? I mean, honestly, who is a stronger leader? Is it Kamala or Donald? I think if you put the two, one right next to each other, there's no question as to who is the stronger leader. So let's be done with this Biden-Harris fiasco, and let's elect a strong leader who will lead our country and who will be a true friend of Israel. I mean, if Israel is your only voting issue, then I think Trump wins every time. When Bibi came to the joint sessions of Congress in July of this year, Kamala Harris, as the vice president, her main job is to preside over the joint sessions of Congress, didn't go. She snubbed him. She went to a sorority party instead. When Trump was in office, he moved the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Israel. Biden and Harris are calling for a ceasefire. Trump says he'll support Israel if Israel's attack on Iran's nuclear facility, if Israel deems that to be the right the right step forward. So again, if Israel's an important voting issue for you, I think Trump wins every time. I think it's time that we get somebody back in office who's going to be a strong leader and who will support Israel's right to support itself or to defend itself unapologetically.